Warning: the following podcast features views and opinions that are likely to trigger the extreme fanboys and fangirls who disagree with them. Listener discretion is advised.
And we're back. Hopefully everybody that's in the States had a good Thanksgiving break. I know Thanksgiving was now 2 weeks ago, but I record these a week in advance. So you didn't get one last week, but that's all right. Give you time to catch up. Give you time to watch Reboot It, season 3 coming up on the season finale, Justice League. So check that out. But today here, hot takes, we're talking 2019. Yeah, I don't do a lot of recent ones. This is fairly recent. 2019's Toy Story 4, because if there's anything that grown men should be upset about, it's Pixar movies. And joining me, one of my favorite guests from the Hey Do You Remember podcast, and now a new podcast, Carlos Freites.
Hey, what's going on? Thanks for having me back on, buddy.
Yeah, so we're both fathers here. You have kids that could probably watch and understand what's happening. I have a 6-month-old, so probably not going to happen.
Right. Yeah.
But you know what? She's very enamored. We put on Toy Story 2, I think, one of them. Anyways, like it's hard for her to keep her attention because she just likes to look at everything. But
Sure.
I know she didn't know what she was watching, but she was enamored by the lights and color of Toy Story 2.
And the big eyes of the characters. That's all part of the design.
So, look, before we get heavily into this, I have joked already, but I feel like we must caveat. I understand the ridiculousness of me as a grown man having issues with clearly a children's movie. Like I'm aware of the fact that I'm actually not the target audience. While Pixar movies are definitely enjoyable to parents, and I do think that as an adults, there's like core story themes and everything that very much resonate. I also understand I am not the target audience for this, and it is slightly ridiculous for me to be like super upset at a kid's movie.
I mean, sure. At the same time, this is one of the rare Pixar movies, though, that has no interest in what adults think of it. I think personally.
I mean, it's so funny. I feel like Pixar and the MCU have very similar cultural biases where it's like when you say Pixar, it's like there's this mark of like a high quality excellence. And I'm not saying that's not even deserved, but it's almost just like you forget that like Cars and Cars 2 are part of it. You forget that some of like some of the sequels to other movies, it's just like it's almost like people who forget that phase 1 and half of phase 2 of the MCU exist, you know.
The first act of Avengers makes no sense.
It's just like I love the Marvel movies, but not everyone is a banger, and I think Pixar is the same way. So let's travel back in time before we start talking about Toy Story 4. 1995, Toy Story. Now I'm kind of in the sweet spot where Toy Story comes out because in 1995 I have just turned 8 or 9 when this thing comes out.
Yeah.
So it's just like I'm at the cusp. Like Disney movies are just about to be a baby thing, you know. I think it was like literally the next year with Pocahontas where I was like, I'm too old for this. Mm-hmm. But Toy Story came around. It was groundbreaking. It was beautiful. Like, do you remember the first time you saw the first Toy Story?
I mean, I don't know. I don't remember the specifics of the occasion on which I first watched Toy Story, but I do remember the awe of like just this looks so real. Like it was like that uncanny valley, which now seems ridiculous when you go back and watch it. But back then, that was video games weren't getting to that sort of, graphics or that sort of animation. And so this was the closest thing to a living cartoon that I had ever seen. And so I do remember just being in utter awe of what I was looking at. But I don't remember like sitting down. I didn't go see this in theaters. Like it would have been on, home video or like HBO or some cable station or something I would have seen it at because I was 12 in 1995. So yeah, I wasn't rushing out to the theaters. I was out of that sweet spot I was more Disney live action movies back then. By that
Sure,
point.
right. Yeah, I think by that point too, it was like, it's hard to get yourself back in the mindset of what you thought of things when you were a kid. Like, obviously, I really loved this movie when I saw it, but I don't think I like walked into it with like, wow, what a technical achievement, or wow, this even looks really different. Like, to me, I was just like, oh, that's another cool Disney like movie that I really like, and Buzz Lightyear is like a cool toy that I definitely want now. Um, so Toy Story, like it definitely was something that I really loved. I don't think I was like obsessed with or anything. And then a couple years later comes Toy Story 2, 1999. Now this definitely is the point where I publicly am not like, hey bro, want to go ask our moms if they'll drop us off at Toy Story 2? I definitely saw that one with my cousin on a Saturday morning, and I don't think like I told any of my friends that I was going, because there's that weird period. It's like it's seventh grade, seventh or eighth.
Oh,
No,
yeah.
it was eighth grade. It was eighth grade for me, and that's definitely not like cool times to be Disney. But that movie itself is one of the rare times where I was just like, I don't know if it's just because I've been out of the cartoon Disney game for a while or not, but this is great. This is better than I remember the first one being. A lot of people think that Toy Story 2 is the best of the trilogy. I don't know where you fall in your ranking.
It's very similar. The Toy Story, I guess now quadrilogy is, I look at it a lot of the same way I look at Indiana Jones, where I am just not a big fan of the even numbered installments. I saw Toy Story 2 and was like, so they just did Toy Story 1, but they reversed who was lost. And okay. I mean, like, and it also felt like, I mean, not a betrayal necessarily. It was like, oh, you're sequelizing a Pixar movie. Like,
it was the first. It was the first to kind of say like, hey, like, because Pixar by that point was kind of like, oh, what's this new groundbreaking kind of outside the box thinking storytelling? Right. So to go back to one, and really we didn't see it again for quite a while. I think it was Cars 2 maybe was the next time that they tried it again. Yeah, because Finding Dory would be a couple of years later.
Sure.
But the one thing that I really liked, and I could definitely see that viewpoint, but the one thing that I do like about giving Woody that kind of storyline that's very similar to Buzz is that Buzz can't accept that he is not a toy, whereas Woody has to accept that he is more than just a toy, which was kind of like it not only reversed it, but then it like, Missy Elliott put this thing down, flipped it, reversed it a couple times.
Right.
Which at the time I thought was really cool. And again, like in eighth grade, I don't even know if like I was thinking critically enough at that point to really put those things together. But by eighth grade, that was around the time where, I mean, this is a podcast, people can't see what's happening, but you and I are video chatting and you can see all the boxed toys on the back of my wall. And that's about the time where I started, like I still love toys and action figures to this day, but that was about the time where I was like, this would look cooler on my wall with a pin tack through it than it would like opening up and playing with it, because I just don't do that anymore. So that story kind of resonated, made me feel guilty about it for like an hour.
For me, I should say the it's interesting that as you're speaking about it, I'm thinking that Toy Story 2 and Toy Story 4 for me are in like direct dialogue with the one that preceded them. So I looked at Toy Story 2 as like, this is a response to Toy Story 1. This is a reversing of Toy Story 1. Toy Story 4 is like, and now we're going to say goodbye to everything, and not just Andy, but all of them. And so when I watch them, I am thinking about the one that came before it.
Well, Toy Story 4, as I was watching it again for this, to even yes and you, like my thought was like, this almost feels like a weird reboot of part 3. It's like, take Bonnie out of the equation. Just imagine that's Andy instead of Bonnie. Like part 4 almost seems like an alternate ending to like in lieu of part 3.
Right.
Because,
Right.
and we'll get to that. I mean, let's talk about part 3 for just half a second, because I do think that's important. Part 3 came out in 2010. Now, by this point, I'm an adult. Like, a lot of my film tastes and everything has started to solidify. I know who I am as a person, so I don't really care that, and it, like, I'm excited, you know, to say, yeah, I bought my ticket, I'm going. And that was like an emotional tour de force. I think, you know, a lot of times when you think about Pixar emotion, the easy one to point to is like, oh yeah, the first couple minutes of Up. But it's like the whole third act of Toy Story 3 is very, very intense emotionally. And it's like, it is such a beautiful bow on this trilogy that, you know, I know you and I maybe don't quite agree on too, but I would say just short of like Lord of the Rings, which I almost don't even count. I feel like Toy Story 3 up to that point was like at least a contender for best movie trilogy ever.
Oh, I absolutely agree with that. It was in the discussion. And the final act of Toy Story 3, I have never cried more in a theater. And I mean, I looked insane because I also had 3D glasses on. And my wife and I took my wife's like younger cousin, just so we're like, okay, well, we are bringing a child to see Toy Story 3. And then the whole third act, we're just like bawling. And this little girl is like, why are you guys crying so hard? And we're like, yeah, just because Andy loves him so much. And yeah, I mean, everything from when they're holding hands in the trash heap and just like believing that they're about to die to the very, you know, and you know, till roll credits, I'm just like, just the tears are just streaming down my face. And I think for me, Toy Story 3 is the best one of the series because it reaches that point. And yeah, I in terms of like Pixar emotional moments, yes, the first few minutes of Up honestly is the only part of Up that I really care about. For me, if Up had just ended with the house being lifted on balloons and floating away, and you just rolled credits over where the house is going, and you see that he's traveling the world, it's the greatest short film in the history of Pixar, which is saying a lot. But also Inside Out, Bing Bong. That's
Yes.
all I will say. I die. I watched that movie with my kids, cried like a baby, told my wife about it later and cried while telling her about it, then watched it again with her that night and cried again. I cried 3 times over that scene in one day.
Let's put a pin in Inside Out, because I definitely want to come back to that, because I feel like that almost has something to do with my gripes with Toy Story 4. But I think for me, and I totally understand that this is like a very it's very specific to me in my life, but it's like, you know, as we've been talking about when I saw these films, you can kind of see like it was also the evolution of me as a person from 6th grade to, you know, end of middle school, entering high school, and then I'm working, college graduate. So these movies, you know, grew up with me essentially. Sure. So like that felt like not only was like a perfect bow to the story of Andy and his toys, but, you know, I kind of, you know, just like probably a lot of kids did, like I saw myself as Andy, and I saw myself kind of like putting a bow on a lot of those things in my life. Now, obviously, you know, maybe I live in a little bit of a state of arrested development because I still have a bunch of toys all around me, but I think it's more just like the thought of like, you know, it's a peaceful goodbye to your childhood, and it's not sad. It's almost like celebrated, like circle of life type stuff. Right. So when I heard that they were doing Toy Story 4, this was around 2015, I think 2014, 2015 is when it was like officially announced, but it took a while for them to develop it. That's red flag number 1, because this movie has like 7 or 8 different writers on it, which is never a good sign. And if you really want to know why, go watch 1994's The Flintstones. There's about 12 writers on that movie, and it still makes absolutely no sense because it's a movie made by committee, and no one just stopped and was like, wait, someone read all that back just to make sure that tracks. this episode is not an indictment of the Flintstones. We'll get there someday. But I feel like with Toy Story 4, step one, or flag one, a lot of writers on it, like, okay. And then when it came out, so this is kind of an interesting story. Maybe this was an omen. I was going to take my wife to see this on date night. We went to sushi dinner. It was nice. And then we got to the theater and I paid and I got the tickets. We literally walked through and they ripped the tickets. So I was like, I have to go to the bathroom. I was like, okay. So I go and I'm kind of standing outside the bathroom waiting for her. She walks out. She's like, I have food poisoning. We're leaving now. So we got through the door and immediately went back home. So I didn't actually see this until 4 months later when it came out on digital. So there's number two. It already felt a little bit small to me.
Sure.
But look, Pixar, and not just Pixar, I think Disney in general, go look at the Star Wars trailers, go look at the Marvel trailers, like their trailers are unbelievable. And when I was like, I don't know about this, like it ended so well. And then that first trailer with the Beach Boys, God Only Knows, as the underscore comes out, and it feels very poignant. I don't know. Do you remember that trailer?
I don't remember that trailer off the top of my head. The only thing I can remember about this movie is that it had been a while since Toy Story 3 came out, and that Tom Hanks had said he didn't want to do like a Toy Story 4, but when he heard what the story was about, that it was something so brave or so, like, I don't know, daring, that he's like, oh, I have to be a part of this. And that really excited me, because what could that possibly mean? And I mean, honestly, I'm still wondering exactly what he was talking about, but yeah, it just seemed like it was going to get into something like insanely profound, and that's what I was expecting. I don't remember the promos for this at all, but that's just me being, again, like a slightly older adult than you are. Like I was just a little further removed from all this.
Yeah, it was a beautiful trailer, and it interested me. I was like, all right, look, I don't want this because there's nowhere to go from here. But like this just there's something about that song, by the way. I'm not a musician in terms of like, I haven't studied it. Yeah, I play instruments, but I would say Beach Boys, God Only Knows, at least in the running for top 100 songs ever written. That's
on Pet Sounds, right? I mean, it's on one of the greatest albums of all time. So
it's just such like a beautifully melancholy love song that I was like, okay, I like where this is going. So we watched it at home, and there were tears from my wife, which, to be fair, she was pregnant. A pedigree commercial could make her cry at that point. But I remember feeling really hollow after it was over. And I was like, that felt like a direct to DVD adventure. Like something was missing for me. And I think part of it is like, let's start to get into it. It's like, I feel like when you talk about Toy Story 1 and Toy Story 2 and Toy Story 3, these are very emotional films, but what makes them beautiful is that the stories are so simple. They're very simple story. They're complex ideas wrapped in very simple stories. And I can tell you, like the first one, it's like, two toys that are rivals that struggle with the meanings of what their existence means. And then the second one is kind of like coming to grips with your identity and your sense of purpose. And the third one is like how to move on, when someone is, when like things have kind of passed you by.
Sure.
This one, there's so many different threads that like I can't really tell you what this movie's about, because you have a character with Forky that's like, okay, the purpose of a toy, which we've already talked about. What makes a toy? Sure. But then you have like Bo Peep coming along who has like a completely different kind of like tone for this movie. And then you have, the chatty Kathy or whatever the bargain brand version of it's called. And it's like, oh, we're doing Jesse's story again. Like there's so many different threads that I still to this day am not quite sure what the elevator pitch for Toy Story 4 is.
And there's also like a reducing of all of Buzz's growth through 3 years. Buzz becomes like almost an idiot this time, and is the first time he's learning about inner voice. Like you've been sentient for 20 years, like
longer than that.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah.
The thing that's crazy too is like, and it's even kind of referenced a little bit in Toy Story 2, is like, this is a family toy, and there's theories that it was his dad's toy, but it's like, either way, this toy was popular in the 50s. So you're telling me now, like 60, 70 years later, that now you're just like, what am I doing with my toy life?
and again, this is like Buzz's first time, like, what do you mean I have to look within for original thoughts and guidance and moral code? Like, Buzz, what have you been doing since Toy Story 1? Like, you've been growing, and now we've just reduced it all the way back. I also don't feel like they emphasize enough Woody's lack of purpose. It doesn't feel like he feels like he lacks purpose. It just feels like Bonnie doesn't love him as much as Andy did, but he's still rousing the group, and he's still like trying to be a leader. And it's not like he doesn't feel depressed. He doesn't feel, I don't know. There's something missing to that arc because he doesn't feel lost.
Well, the thing that's like kind of where it loses me, like right up front, is like, Woody's in the closet and he's not the favorite anymore. It's like, yeah, I know. Like, we go through this. Like, this is the third time that we've been through this. And the fact of the matter is, and the reason why I said like this almost plays as if Toy Story 3 never happened, minus like the kid switch, obviously, is that, that's Woody's whole entire character arc of Toy Story 3, is realizing like, it's not that I bring joy to this one kid. It's I bring joy to who needs me and who loves me. And the reason why these relationships that I form with these kids are special is because they don't last. Anything that really means something, like, it doesn't last, but that doesn't mean that it's not impactful. Like, that's really heavy stuff. But then you get to Toy Story 4 and it's almost these like, or maybe it means that I should just abandon this kid and figure out what I want to do. Maybe I had it all wrong last time, because the Woody that in this movie that's like, I need to become like the Batman of toys and like be a vigilante toy saver, is like, is not the Woody that we've seen before. That's like, I am Bonnie's toy, and she may not need me today, but until Bonnie decides that she doesn't need me anymore, I'm Bonnie's toy. Like, I don't know. Yeah. This feels like a different Woody.
It absolutely is. And again, yeah, Toy Story 3, we went through this. Andy's a grown boy. He's going to college, and so he's already felt the I'm not needed anymore by my kid. So none of this jives well. It all just feels like you said, a reboot of Toy Story 3. It feels like, or we could have done this thing. And in terms of like you saying like it feels like a made for or straight to home video kind of, it feels like an episode of Toy Story, not a Toy Story movie. Somehow, like, it just doesn't feel,
it's like oddly claustrophobic, which is so bizarre because it's like the imagery of this movie and all the posters and everything is like this big carnival and this big fair, and that definitely does play into it, but we're like watching it from a window for like 2/3 of the movie, and we're just like, I feel trapped, and I get it, that's like how the characters feel. It's very deliberate, but it just feels, especially after Toy Story 3, it just feels like the stakes are so low to me, especially too if Woody ends up where he's just like, she'll be fine without you. It's like, well, then what was the whole point of this? Like, what was the rush then? If she's going to be fine, I guess it's to get Forky back, but then like they even kind of blow that where she's like, well, she obviously, is so attached to Forky that she just went and made another one out of a knife at the end,
Not looking good for Forky.
Why would you give a 4-year-old or a 3-year-old a plastic knife? What terrible parents are you?
Honestly, even a spork is kind of rough for a kindergartner. So yeah.
Yeah, there's a lot of like eye pokey things. I'm just like, are you sure she should be playing with? It's all dirty. She's like drops like what hobo parents just like drop a piece of a spork on the ground, be like, here, play with this. Glue some googly eyes to this and leave me alone.
Also, yeah, this is a little nitpicky, but the objects that Forky is made out of, I'm sorry, that thing does not last a year. like the end credits, she's in first grade now, so it's been a year, and I'm sorry, Forky is long dead.
That
Forky
glue,
is trash.
Elmer's glue does not hold those toothpick feet together.
Only if you absolutely never touch it, ever.
Yeah, but the thing is, like, so I guess I was kind of disappointed because I was like, all right, Forky, a lot of the times it was like convincing someone their toy, like the Buzz Lightyear thing was like, you're not a space ranger, you are not this thing. And I was like, oh, cool. Like, that's kind of an interesting, like, kind of remix of that, where it's like, oh, you're not a piece of trash, like this kind of like self-actualization of like, I matter, which is like super important now. And like the self-confidence to be like, this is what you were made for. And I almost feel like, as much as Forky is front and center on all the posters and all the trailers and everything, it's like Forky's story is not, that's like a B story in this.
I really thought the movie was going to be about Forky, and also like that disheartened me. I was like, this was the groundbreaking thing Tom Hanks had to be a part of. Forky. and then yeah, Forky is, and I think I probably read like a spoilery, kind of mildly spoilery review where they're like, Forky is really a first act problem, essentially, that kind of goes away pretty much after that. Like, he'll show up for some jokes, but for the most part, Forky's more a MacGuffin than a character after the first act. It's like, oh, okay, well, that somehow gives me hope. But again, but this is what you're pushing. You're pushing Forky. Like the Disney store was pushing Forky everywhere. And Forky,
it almost feels like an inside joke bet. Like there were some guys that sat around a table or like, I bet you we could get kids to buy us. Like he's just eating lunch and he's like, I bet you we could get kids to buy a spork. Like they'll pay $29.99 for this spork. $100 as I get it done in the next 2 years. And then Toy Story 4 comes along.
I mean, honestly, a lot of this movie feels about that cynical. Like,
that's the word. That's the word. This one feels cynical, yes. And not even just like a cash grab. Like, because everything that is for sale is essentially a cash grab. But this feels like it doesn't feel warm to me. Like even the message that comes out of it feels kind of like, well, the world's a cold, hard place, and if you have a relationship that ends, you just got to deal with it and move on. And I'm just like, I don't know, Yeah. Like I play it as such like this like poignant moment for Buzz and Woody when they finally say goodbye. But the fact that Buzz is just like, she'll be all right. Like, what in your 3 other adventures plus shorts on ABC Family makes you think that this kid is going to be okay? We have literally spent hours making sure that you get back to your kid because you don't think they're going to be okay without you. Like, it's just like, Woody, you've got other things going on. You go do you, boo. I'm like, that is not Toy Story.
It's really not. I feel like this movie was, when I say cynical, the thing that really comes across is that goodbye moment with Buzz. Although I'll give it, but the Buzz and Woody hug is like the warmest of all of those moments. But it really does feel like they were just trying to replicate the feeling at the end of Toy Story 3 with Andy saying goodbye to all the toys. And now they're saying, well, let's do that again, but this time with Woody saying goodbye to all the toys. And they were just working their way to like, okay, but what is the situation that would get us to say that Woody has to say goodbye to all these toys? And then it almost feels like when it wasn't working, they're like, but we'll make it at night and they'll have the glow of the carousel will be in all of their eyes. Like they are trying so hard to make this like the sweetest, like the most bittersweet moment, and the strings are going. And I just, I don't feel even a fraction of what I felt when Andy reaches into that box and realizes that Woody's at the bottom of the box and makes the decision. I am now going to give this my favorite, my best friend. I'm going to pass it on to a new child. Like it's not even it's not even apples and oranges. It's like apples and a painting of an apple that's telling you it's apples. You know, like it's like this is a bad Xerox copy of the final moments of Toy Story 3, and it feels manipulative more than it feels I guess organic or it's certainly not emotional. I'm not emotional very much at the end of that movie as much as I should be.
I mean, it's also like it was an odd choice to me, especially if we're going to have this big goodbye where Woody goes his own way and does his own thing, that we split him up from the group for like the whole movie. So by the time that we reunite to say goodbye again, like, yeah, it doesn't hit for me because it's like, I didn't just go on a journey with you like we did trying to get out of the daycare together. Like it doesn't feel together. It feels like Woody already left.
Yeah,
so by the time that they say goodbye, it's like, well, yeah, I've already processed that Woody is now capable of having a complete movie essentially by himself. And you guys have a very bad B story all by yourselves too. Like that's the other thing too is like, and look, I get, this is where I was caveating. Like, I get that I'm nitpicking a children's cartoon, but it's like the whole thing with like, the influence of toys on real life was like incredibly minimal. And when it was used for huge effect, like scaring the crap out of Sid by breaking that character for just a second. Like that was really impactful. But then when you have them doing like the voice of the GPS and going in a circle, it's like, well,
driving a car.
I know. I already thought that those were bad parents for letting her play with the fork, but now it's like, are you just like mentally like just not able to drive a car? Like, are you not like, should you not be licensed to drive a car? How do you not realize what is happening here? How do you not like, it clearly doesn't sound like your phone is giving you a GPS. Like you wouldn't be like, what is that? My phone has never said, like, I get it. I'm asking too much, but at this point I just didn't like that the toys were so brazen to be like, well, we can take a little more control than usual. It's like, but part of the fun of a lot of those other movies was watching them try to manipulate real world things in a sneaky way to not get caught. And this one, I feel like they're just like, if we get caught, whatever,
The other movies almost invite you to wonder if everything you're watching is sort of imaginary.
Yes, 100%.
This is like, no, there is no question. And then it makes you, this is the one that makes you think about how real these toys are the longest, which is like a close-up on a practical effect in a movie where you're just, you get enough time to looking and see the seams in a monster suit. Like if you're thinking about the whole time, like, wait, they're just like walking around and no one sees them. They're walking around a crowded carnival and no one sees them. No one saw that streamer go across the aisle when Keanu Reeves, I can't even remember the name of his character.
Duke Kaboom. I will say, if there's a positive out of this movie that I really love, it's like, man, I wish Duke Kaboom had been in some of the other movies that I liked more, because that character was really funny.
I laughed every time Duke Kaboom said that French kid's name. Is it Bijan?
Yeah, Rajan.
I and when he's doing the poses, with the fact that 2 times he goes, oh yeah, like that one makes me laugh. But like no one saw that. Like in the other movies, I can kind of get into a mindset. I was like, yeah, but this is all like, it's toys. It's like imaginary. Maybe this is just happening in the imagination of a child. In this movie, it's like, no, they're going to get the dad arrested for possibly like a DUI in the middle of a carnival. And, like they're making real life moves here. I don't want to be thinking about that, honestly, while I'm watching a Toy Story movie. But again, you're right. This is not intended for us. This is for smaller kids, but I feel like we've had a compact with Pixar. Like, you will make movies for our kids, but we will enjoy them on an adult level. And this movie is like, no, not this one, not for you guys.
Yeah, it seems too. It's like, I think Toy Story kind of runs up into a lot of problems that something like Jurassic Park does, where it's like, in order for that franchise to be successful, there's very limited ways you could do that formula for it to work. Like, it's man shows up, didn't expect to get stuck there, and there are dinosaurs chasing them. There's not a whole lot you can do with it. So the fact that you get to like Jurassic World Fallen Kingdom and most people just hate it, it's like, well, yeah, there's just nowhere else to go with it. And I kind of feel like by Toy Story 4, it's like, oh man, that like you kind of disguised like lots of Hug and Bear as, you know, the Christina Hendricks doll, and you disguised like, you know, this piece from Toy Story 1 and this piece from Toy Story 2, and like you kind of remixed it all.
Yeah.
But I'm just like, I'm baffled when I like look at the Rotten Tomatoes score, and it's like 97% of the critics are like positive about it. I'm just like, am I crazy? Like I feel, or am I so close to Toy Story that it's just like I'm seeing like all the, it's not even homages, like they're just like flat out replacing characters and putting in the same beats. Like if I come to this and like I think I saw one or two of them, would I enjoy this more?
Yeah, I mean, if you told me that this was the rebooted Toy Story pitch, and I could believe that it's separate from the trilogy that came before it, and this is the new Toy Story, awesome, great. But it exists with 3 other movies that have used just versions of these plot lines and these characters many times before, and it's going to get so fast and loose with the rules of the toys that you're going to wonder, like, but why does Forky fall down when Bonnie shows up if Forky doesn't believe it's a toy? If Forky just wants to go to the garbage, why doesn't Forky just keep going to the garbage? You know, why get into character if you don't believe you're a character? None of that stuff makes sense. And the movie, I hate to ask those questions in a movie like this, but the movie makes me ask those questions because it's playing so fast and loose with those rules.
It's just like, too, you know, you mentioned that Tom Hanks said, like, you know, this is brave what we're doing, and I have to come back for this. It's like, I thought it was strange. And again, I'm not holding this against the movie because I hate it when people are like, I didn't like this movie because they didn't go with my pitch, you know? But I did think it was a little strange where it's like, we are at a time, I felt this a lot when Rise of Skywalker came out. I was devastated when I found out that there was not going to be a toy line for it. There just wasn't. They're like, kids don't buy toys like that anymore. I was like, wow, what an interesting Toy Story 4 that would have been if it's like, video games and cell phone apps have replaced the need for these toys. And it's almost just like when Toy Story 4 comes around, like the world outside of Pixar and outside of Toy Story has changed so much. And I feel like the Toy Story world does not reflect the world anymore. It's like, well, these toys almost kind of like, you know, give them something that we can relate to. Like, what does it feel like to be an outdated toy in a world where people are playing with video games and cell phone apps, and like you can't literally compete with like the technology of what kids play with? Like that to me is like, okay, that's a reason to come back to do a Toy Story with these characters. But this just feels like, minus Woody leaving, which like, okay, it's like the status quo, it remains exactly the same by the end of this movie.
Yeah, and as a parent of kids who just really never played with toys all that much, that is a more interesting story. Like my kids they don't even play video games. They watch people play video games on YouTube.
So like crazy. That used to be the worst part of your friend having a cool video game was having to sit there and watch him play it, you know?
And him go like, hold on, I'll show you how to do it. And then he plays for 45 minutes. Like kids don't play with toys like that anymore. So yeah, really the whole concept is a relic of a forgotten time.
Yeah, just I guess that's what's most disappointing to me, because I was talking to my mother-in-law. She was like, really, you hate this movie? And I was just like, you know, hate's a strong word, because I don't think this is a bad movie in a vacuum. If I watch this, like I would almost think it's like fairly effective. But I think because it is the 4th part of this perfect trilogy, that like I almost grade it so much more harshly. Like it's a fine movie, but because it's just fine, it's like very upsetting that it's only fine. You know,
if this was the 3rd movie in the trilogy and Toy Story 3 did not exist, I'd be okay with Toy Story 4. But Toy Story 3 is like one of the best sequels ever, in my opinion. And it ends so beautifully that I just do not care to see the story go on. I don't care as much going into it. So unless you're giving me something, I mean, honestly, super heavy, which isn't really appropriate for a Toy Story movie, like kind of like the runaway plot line in Inside Out, to get back to Inside Out, like that, suddenly it starts getting really heavy, and you're dealing with some really serious stuff. You're dealing with like depression, and you're dealing with, you know, things like that. I thought, honestly, because I didn't see this movie until, I think it was probably until the pandemic. I think it was probably until Disney Plus. When Forky just keeps trying to throw himself in the garbage, I turned to my wife. I was like, is this movie going to low key be about suicide? Is that what this movie's about? Like, because I'm trying to remember, I'm trying to factor in that Tom Hanks said this was so crazy and bold and brave that he had to do it. So I'm like, is this movie like about suicide? Oh my God. Like, I'm not watching this movie with my kids. They went way too far. But then it's not even, it's not about anything. So I almost prefer that it was about something that heavy. But yeah, I'll just be reiterating my discontent with the themes.
Let's talk about one of the other like big selling points of this movie, which again was like, okay, was the return of Bo Peep, which like I remember she didn't show up for Toy Story, was it 3 by that point?
Yeah.
And I thought, I actually really love that, and I'll tell you why. Like for Toy Story 3, like those were the bits of realism that I loved. It's like, well, we lost Bo, and they don't go into what happened or why, but it's like as a just as a kid that grew up, it's like, yeah, there are times when your mom's like, look, after Christmas or before Christmas, like there's a bag, time to donate the stuff that you don't play with anymore. And I could totally see, like, I loved kind of like the toys maybe don't even quite 100% understand why she's gone, but she's gone. And then this movie does what I hate, which is like, they go back and they fill in like this, oh, by the way, story way after the fact. And it's like, it became this whole thing where, again, like she gets lost. It's like, okay, well, the last time one of you fell out a window and got lost, we had a whole movie trying to find you. Why are you telling me that Bo Peep wasn't worth the same effort? But then she shows up. I mean, really, like that was my first thought. I was like, man, this is like if Toy Story 2 was about Bo Peep, it'd be a 3-minute movie. But then it's like she shows up, and it's like, I do think that gives that character like a lot of pathos. Like I was on my own, and now I wear pants because I was on my own. Wow, for some reason.
Yeah. I wasn't an action figure, but somehow I can get dressed. I was part of a lamp.
Porcelain, and now I somehow have cloth clothes. Sure.
Technically not a toy.
But I get, like, I feel like, again, that character is kind of like, that character in herself probably had a lot of pathos that we didn't even really explore. She was just kind of there to push, again, Woody through another mid-toy crisis. And it's like, my God, dude, like you are having the same existential crisis like 3 movies in a row now. And like all these people in your life are trying to help you, and you just cannot pick a lane. I would almost rather like this movie had been like a quasi spinoff and been about Bo Peep's adventure. I mean, that's kind of where I thought Toy Story 4 was kind of going to go anyway, which was the way of like a Force Awakens, where it's like, yeah, we'll get Buzz and Woody for a minute, but it's like these Key and Peele toys and Forky. Like it's going to be like the new generation kind of like, passing on the torch. And it's not. It's like all these characters, you had like this new cast all lined up, and you blow it.
Yeah. It did feel like a backdoor pilot for a new series of Toy Story movies. I'm not going to be interested in that line. I don't know. I wonder if like, not to pitch, but what if Woody had run into another Woody?
Oh, definitely. Like,
that would have been interesting.
That would have been new. It would have just been like, we saw Buzz obviously with like the Hall of Buzzes.
Right.
But to find a Woody could you imagine if like Woody found another Woody and he was so excited, he's like, what kind of adventures did you have with your boy or your girl? And it's just like a completely different experience that maybe then made Woody think like, oh, maybe not all toy destinies are one thing. Maybe it's kind of like, you know, everybody's path is different. Again, like another like, you do the video game thing, do the another Woody, like do anything instead of doing Toy Story 3 all over again with a villain who turns out to just be, I just needed a hug and I would have been fine, you know?
Yeah.
Even like the imagery of like the henchmen for her, those like Goosebumps looking mannequin dolls, like even that was like, okay, this is like a little bit of Sid's room with a little bit of the daycare. Like this just
a little
feels,
bit of the baby, right, from daycare.
Yeah, it just feels rote at this point. Like, I get it. I've been here. And by that point, I was like, where you never want to be in one of these movies, which is just like, all right, let's just get to the end because I want to see how this all just wraps up. Like, I'm kind of tired of the obstacle adventure. Like, just get me to the end so I can see like what the thesis statement is. And now I'm not sure. Like, I guess it's sweet that Woody wants to help other toys be lost, but it's like that poignant last line of like, so Woody's a lost toy. Is like, he's not lost. It's just like,
not anymore.
Okay, sure. It's like, not anymore. It's like, okay, have you then been saying like everything since Bonnie has just been like you've been in this kind of like quasi crisis? Like, that's depressing.
That's kind of what I needed to see in order for the final moments to pay off. Is I needed in the first act Woody to be almost depressed, like, I'm not getting played with, I'm not important.
But that was Toy Story 3.
It is Toy Story 3. But at least in Toy Story 3, Woody's got the added objective of like shepherding his crew into the new status quo, into the new government of the daycare. In this, like, they're already shepherded in, and they're all doing great. He's the only one who's not doing well, and that is interesting. That could have been interesting if it was just like, if Woody was not this like relentless ball of positivity, if finally he had broken on the inside. He was lost, but he's not. He's never lost. He's always finding purposes. You know, it's always to make Bonnie happy. It's always to make sure Bonnie is okay. So he has a purpose.
I mean, I even feel like it would have hit more if Bonnie wasn't disinterested in Woody. If he was just a part of the toys and everything was fine, and he's like, I don't get it. I'm being played with. This is what I thought I wanted. Why doesn't this feel the same? You know, like, okay, I'm not a huge fan of that, but at least that tracks.
Exactly.
You know?
There is no track. There's nothing to track.
And it's just like, again, this movie almost inadvertently makes me dislike Bonnie, because I'm just like, what? Like, you just got these toys that I care more about those toys than you, because I've known them longer. And for you to just toss it aside for your, like, you know, lunch utensil, I get it. That's what a kid does. But I'm just saying, like, you know, like, yeah, screw Bonnie. All of you should just go somewhere else. Like, Bonnie's the worst.
Yeah, let's. That's what Toy Story 4 should have been about, was like them framing Bonnie for murder and to get rid of Bonnie. No, but like, Woody is like, he goes to Bonnie's kindergarten orientation to make sure, because he sees that Bonnie is scared. So he goes against orders and he gets in the book bag and he goes with her. Then he gives her all of this stuff so that she builds Forky. Then he shepherds Forky into the world of toys, even so much as like when Forky falls out of the car, he goes after, and now they're on their adventure together. At no point do I feel like Woody lacks purpose. Woody knows what his purpose is the whole time, so he doesn't feel lost. Like, it's you're just telling me he was lost, and he wasn't. So at the end, when Buzz is like, he's not lost. Not anymore. No, he's not lost. He's never been lost. That's it. Like, he's always had a purpose. He finds purposes.
Remember when Buzz was like the coolest character in these movies?
Yeah.
Because he was not. And this one, I'm just like, oh yeah, I forgot you were still here. Like,
Yeah.
I just can't believe they
Go ahead.
sidelined him so bad.
It's like the Kramer effect. Like, not only did they sidelight him, but he's a caricature of Buzz at this point. I had to ask myself, like, do they just not like Tim Allen? Maybe that's what it is. Maybe he's just like
I mean,
not a fun
even if I
person.
dislike the guy, like,
Yeah.
I want those Buzz Lightyear toys to keep selling to the next generation because everyone that would have wanted one is older now. So it's like, I don't know, like Buzz Lightyear is one of the coolest original characters to come out. And the fact that like Buzz Lightyear was so cool that he even had his own like TV show that was kind of like in universe-esque where it was like the adventures of Buzz Lightyear, the
Right.
Space Ranger. Like you had like a franchise with this guy, and then it's like why are we going back to Woody again? Like, I mean, really any other character. Like, that's not a diss at Woody, but it's just like we resolved Woody's emotional problems. Or maybe that's the problem with part 4 is like everyone's emotional problems were already resolved, so we have to like either like regress them back, which I really hate when sequels and really seasons of TV shows. It's like the Dr. House effect, where it's like Dr. House was this awesome character, and then they're like, well, we have to grow him somehow. And then by season 6 or 7, they're just like, well, we got to start all over again. So so he gets back on drugs, and it's like season 1 all over again. I feel like that's what we did in this movie, and it's just like I don't hate it. When my daughter is of age to like understand and love these movies properly, like I'm not going to be like, well, we don't watch the 4th one in this house. Like it's totally fine. It's just like, oh man, if you're gonna with Toy Story is one of those ones like if you're gonna do it, you have to stick the landing. And this is the Carrie Scruggs. Yeah, you kind of rolled your ankle at the end and you're standing, but it doesn't work for me. It doesn't work for me.
Wow, went 96 Olympics. Deep cuts.
I don't know where that came from, by the way. That came out of absolutely. That was like the other day. Someone was talking about money, and I was trying to make a joke, like, "All right, Mr. Moneybags," and just for out of nowhere, because I feel like maybe I was having a stroke. I was like, "All right, Lamont Cranston," like the most. The most random shadow reference, sure. And they're like, "Ooh," I was like, "Never mind."
Yeah, yeah. It's best that we never mind this.
I think my brain is starting to shut down, and just like little random fragments of little neurons are firing. Like, oh yeah, that thing. Yeah, I don't have any like OJ references or anything to close this out with, but it's Toy Story 4 it's fine. It's fine. Yeah. And for Toy Story, fine is not good enough for me.
Especially this late in the series.
So do you think that they're like, we've closed the chapter on Toy Story. Do you think they've really closed the book?
No, not at all. I don't. I think the ending of the film feels like I said, like a backdoor pilot for a new series, like a new generation of toys.
With like the Key and Peele toys, which again, like that was like the first thing that ever came out about this was the Key and Peele video of their characters, and then they're in it for a little bit, but they didn't factor into this movie the way I thought they were going to.
I kind of wonder if they're in it so sparsely because they're clearly riffing.
Oh yeah,
and so you just animate that. Yeah, you animate that afterwards. Maybe, I don't know.
That seems like. I mean, obviously, if you get them together and they're recorded together, so you're going to get gold, but like that must have been a nightmare. Like, yeah. I imagine it was probably as difficult as like animating Robin Williams' Genie, where it's just like, oh.
I was about to say it's definitely not as difficult as animating Robin Williams' Genie, because then you also have to factor in like how many references was he throwing out per minute, and how many of them were completely inappropriate for children.
By the way, this is a complete aside, and I'm not editing this out because it's the final season and I don't care anymore. But did you see Robin's Wish?
No. I didn't.
So if for listeners, or maybe you, if you're not familiar, there was a documentary that came out just a couple months ago. It was called Robin's Wish, and it's about the end of his life and kind of what he was going through. And I really thought it was going to be kind of a little bit more retrospective and like kind of celebratory. It is downer city. They tell you exactly what he was going through, and it is awful. And it ends on this note, like, this disease, Lewy body dementia, like, is really terrible. And if you get it, like, you don't even know what to do, and you can't help your loved ones. Roll credits. And you're just like, gee. I remember my wife and I was like, we have to watch this because, like, I really, like, I love Robin Williams so much. And by the end, we were just like quiet. And it's like, what do you want to watch next? I'm like, I don't know. You can put on whatever you want.
Maybe the History Channel has some stuff about the Holocaust you can watch.
maybe just put on something some Holocaust documentary to lighten the mood in here. It's very, like, it definitely explains a lot. And if you're kind of like a Robin Williams fan and just kind of want to know what he went through, it's like a very good watch. But, like, do not expect this, like, glowing documentary about his work and his life. It's really hard watch.
I remember after he passed, Bobcat Goldthwait, I believe, was on Marin, and was talking about how, I mean, because he and Robin Williams were like best friends from San Francisco and whatnot, and just going on about how he was having hallucinations and how it was getting really, really bad, and how they would kind of like darkly joke about what he was seeing when they would be together. And so, yeah, I don't know that I need a whole documentary about the last days of Robin Williams, because it sounds really dark and really awful.
I don't even know how to swing this back. Not a no. I was like, no. I don't even know how to swing back to Toy Story 4.
I mean, if you realize that all of the toys are a hallucination, and
we're all suffering some hallucination that they're alive. I mean, you brought up a good point that I didn't even think about, which is like, yeah, I really like when you think about it, it's like, maybe those toys, maybe all these adventures aren't even real. In those first three, it is kind of left like ambiguous, or not ambiguous, but it's like you could reasonably make the argument, that was kind of the fun. That was the whole premise of Toy Story. It's like, what do your toys do when you're not there? And it's like, the last thing that I want is like, they doubt their, they doubt their own purpose and decide to leave you to go find other toys that you dropped at the supermarket. I mean, I remember when I was a kid, I was a huge fan of Robin. Batman was fine, but Robin was my guy. Okay. And I had a little Robin action figure that I dressed up as Robin for a year. And I had a little Robin action figure that I took with me, and I lost him at the store. I was at Country Boy Supermarket, and I was crying my head off. My mom got me in the car. She's like, and I'll never forget it. Like, I still vividly remember this. She's like, he actually wanted me to tell you that there was another little kid that didn't have any friends, and he needed someone to protect him. So Robin asked if he could go stay with that boy and protect him. And immediately, as a kid, I was like, okay, that tracks. That makes sense.
Yep,
like, I get it. That's, if he had to go, he had to go. And I kind of feel like that moment with my mom in her car was much more poignant than the 97 minutes of Toy Story 4.
So your mom want to get a job at Pixar? Jeez. That's incredible.
I guess, but it's like those moments that you remember as a kid, that it's just like, I guess that's kind of the heart I was looking for from this one that I didn't get, like, I don't know. I don't know how to, this one's just missing the magic for me. Obviously people loved it. I'm very much in the minority, are you and me are. This thing is like made over $1 billion, not surprisingly.
Which is why, again, there will be a Toy Story 5. Come on.
There'll be a Toy Story 5 and Key and Peele and probably Forky, and I don't know, maybe they'll give, one of the other, I don't know, they probably still have like 10 years worth of Don Rickles recorded stuff to use, 10 movies worth. Yeah, look, it exists. It's fine. Fine is not good enough for me for Toy Story 4, but there it is. That's why when I talk about greatest trilogies of all time, I kind of have to retract Toy Story or put an asterisk on it, because it's like, Toy Story, greatest trilogy, fourth part kind of kills it, but the rest is great.
Not a trilogy anymore. Just like
it's not. Boo.
Just like Up isn't a short film, and it should be.
Just like, oh man, when they announced Jackass 4, part of me was just like, you had the greatest trilogy of all time with those Jackass movies. What are you doing? It was in the running for like all three of those movies are just A+ movies in my book. So
we read different books.
We read very different books, but we listen to the same podcasts. Hey, do you remember? Is going strong. And then what else are you working on here?
So I'm a new contributor to a podcast called the Racial Draft Podcast, which is it's a nerd podcast where basically in a fantasy sports format, different racial delegations, in reference to the Dave Chappelle racial draft sketch from 20 years ago, different racial delegations draft different comic book characters and reimagine them as members of that racial background. So an Asian Tony Stark, for instance, how would being, say, Japanese, how would that inform Tony Stark? And I went into this podcast, I binged it in like 3 weeks, the whole first season. And then I got to the creator and I was like, I need to be a part of this podcast because this is like everything that I love, fantasy sports and comic books. And I'm a member of a race. And and so I am now part of the Latin delegation, and our draft actually for season 2 is coming up in the next week. The Racial Draft Podcast. It is not my creation. I am a late comer to it, but I'm a big fan of it, and enough that I asked to be on it permanently. So yeah, get into that. But also, hey, do you remember? We've been going strong for 7.5, almost 8 years, and we've covered just the gamut. We've done everything.
Have you guys done Toy Story?
No, we don't touch animation so much. Like we really, because it is more difficult for us to dissect the filmy aspects of animation. I think the only ones we've done we did Rudolph the Red-Nosed Reindeer. We did Nightmare Before Christmas. And there might be another one in there, but I don't know.
So stop motion gets a pass.
Yeah, stop motion is okay. Wallace and Gromit, come on down.
Yeah, that's how I met you, and Chris has been on the show, and I haven't really met Donna, but there's still time. Season 4 of this is still going. I want to thank you so much for joining. One of my favorite people to talk to. Awesome. If we're not talking on a podcast, I'm just going to bug you on Facebook Messenger.
Can I just say before we get out of here, congratulations on this show. I know this is the final season, so congratulations. This has been a positive podcast about movies, which I didn't know they could make anymore. So yeah, congratulations to you. I'm happy that you're going out on your own terms.
Oh, thank you so much, man. Yeah, look, even hopefully, if you're listening to this, this was it's funny you say that, because this was one of the few episodes that are like very crapping on what we just watched. But you know what? I think if you love this movie, and if it speaks to you, and if there's something in this movie where it's just like, wow, that hit me in a place I wasn't expecting, then it's totally valid. Because there are movies that have like 3% Rotten Tomatoes score, but there was something in it that just struck a chord with me emotionally. And really that's all that movies and art really is. It's like, yes, there's craft, and there's, this, and there's that, and there's rules and whatever. But if it speaks to you on some emotional level, it has value. Mm-hmm. So whenever you're just about to type a very long Facebook or Twitter post about why someone is so wrong and you must stand up for it, just remember, as long as it makes you feel something, it has value, and that's all that really matters. And on that note, you should value next week's episode because it's gonna be great. That was very Trump. It's gonna be great. We're doing a great episode next week. It's gonna be the biggest episode, most downloads I've ever had. We're doing a great job. I have no idea what it's gonna be. Flying a little bit by the seat of the pants.
You're just writing checks you cannot cash.
Right? This may just serve as the series finale. Who knows? But one way or another, even if it's just me, I'll be back next week. Thank you guys so much. I'll see you next week.